At exactly 7:45 on a Tuesday morning, I walked out my front door holding a mug of coffee, still half asleep, and just about lost my grip when I saw what was waiting on my front lawn. My jaw about hit the ground where my grass used to be. There were picnic tables set up a sandbox with plastic buckets, and I swear an elderly couple doing yoga stretches right next to my mailbox, waving like I was a park ranger. And get this, a huge vinyl banner stretched right across my fence, bold as daylight, reading Meadowbrook Community Recreation Area Phase 1. I had to rub my eyes twice just to make sure I wasn't still dreaming, but then I saw the real kicker, a bronze plaque hammered right into the old oak tree my uncle planted 100 years ago. It said official HOA property for public use and enjoyment. Open dawn to dusk. Yeah, that happened. Now, if you're wondering how in the world that could happen without my say-so, you're in good company. I sure as heck didn't agree to any of it. Not a single word. But there she was, Karen Mitchell, the queen bee herself, standing at the edge of my property with her infamous clipboard and that smug little smile she wears like designer perfume. She looks me dead in the eye and says, all triumphant, that since I didn't respond to the community survey about property optimization, whatever the heck that is, my silence meant consent. She even quoted Article 17 of the HOA bylaws like she was some small-town judge. Now let me back up a sec. There's no Article 17. Never has been. I told her that straight up. She taps her clipboard like she's tapping the gavel and says, oh no, it was added last month at the emergency meeting she held at 6 a.m. on a Monday. Who holds a meeting at 6 a.m.? People with something to hide, that's who. My name's David Harrison. I'm 45, and 4 years ago I moved to this so-called peaceful Montana neighborhood after inheriting my uncle's 3-acre spread. The old-timers around here always left my land alone, out of respect. My family's name was on that deed before the HOA even existed. I kept to myself, grew vegetables, rebuilt, classic bikes in my garage, taught a woodworking class at the community college, never bothered anybody. But Karen, she was a different breed. Took over as HOA president 6 months back, unopposed, of course, because she ran the election during the Super Bowl, if you can believe that. Always in beige pantsuits, that leather-bound clipboard, never leaving her hand like it's some badge of authority. She'd memorized every HOA rule, and a few she just flat out invented. Her personal mission: turn this place into what she called a premier residential community experience. What that meant for the rest of us was a new level of crazy. First, she started with inspections. Sent her compliance crew to every house snapping pictures for optimization opportunities. When they reached my gate, I told them to leave. They just leaned over and took photos anyway. Next thing I know, there's a glowing article in the HOA newsletter about my generous donation of land for the Meadowbrook Wellness Initiative. I hadn't donated squat. I hadn't even spoken to anyone about my property. 2 weeks later, I come home and find surveyors tramping around putting orange flags all over my yard. They said Karen sent them to map out a community garden. I told them to get lost, they left, but the flags stayed. I'd pull them up, fresh ones popped up overnight. The next week, it got worse. I'm woken up at sunrise to the sound of heavy machinery. A landscaping crew tearing out my split-rail fence, rolling sod over my wildflower meadow. The foreman hands me a work order signed by Karen claiming she got verbal permission from the property owner. I called the cops. They told me it was a civil issue. By the time I got my lawyer on the phone, there's already a concrete path and 2 park benches in my yard. The final insult, I leave for a teaching conference, and when I come back, there's a full-on gazebo standing where my tomatoes used to be, 20 feet wide, painted white with HOA Community Pavilion etched in the beams. Karen's hosting a ribbon-cutting, giving speeches about community togetherness. She even mails me an invoice for $8,000, calling it my share of the improvement costs. When I refused, she slapped on late fees and threatened to lien on my property. It didn't stop there. She started waving paperwork in my face, quoting some doctrine of communal absorption, whatever that means, saying any property inside the HOA could be converted to shared use for the greater good. I asked to see it in black and white. She just gave me that condescending tone, saying I clearly hadn't read her supplemental amendments filed with the county. Well, turns out those amendments only existed in Karen's imagination and on a stack of forged documents. Every week brought something new. A playground popped up near my vegetable garden, a little amphitheater right where I used to park my project bikes, a whole row of porta potties along my east fence, even though supposedly the park was only the front yard. She scheduled HOA events on my land without telling me, book clubs in the gazebo, exercise classes on the lawn, once even a wedding reception in my backyard. I'm not kidding. But the last straw, I came home one Saturday from the hardware store and found my irrigation pond had been turned into a community swimming hole. Kids were splashing, parents grilling next to my septic tank, a big banner reading, "First Annual HOA Summer Splash Spectacular," with a lifeguard chair bolted right to my patio. Karen's at a folding table selling HOA-branded towels, collecting donations for swim passes, acting like she owns the place. She hands me a laminated map with my whole 3 acres marked as community property, my own house labeled future site of the HOA headquarters and visitor center. I asked her if she'd lost her mind. She just smiled and said it was all above board, filed with the proper authorities, change of land use registered with the county zoning office. According to her, my property was now public parkland. She even had the nerve to say I should be grateful for the increased property value. That's when I'd had enough. So I called the county myself. The clerk on the line goes from confused to concerned to real interested in a matter of minutes. She says they'll send someone out right away. Within the hour, 3 county vehicles pull up, zoning inspector, permits officer, and for good measure, a sheriff's detective who specializes in fraud. They ask to see Karen's paperwork. She hands over a whole folder of official documents. The inspector looks them over for maybe 30 seconds and just says, "These are fakes." The county seal was wrong. The signature was from some guy who'd retired 5 years ago. And the property description didn't match any real parcel in the county. Karen had forged everything. The detective starts taking notes, asking how HOA money was spent. That's when it all came crashing down. Turns out Karen spent over $60,000 of HOA funds on improvements to my land, never got board approval, hired her brother-in-law's landscaping company at triple the market rate, sold tickets to every event, and pocketed the money. She even charged food trucks to park on my grass and took a cut from every sale. Those porta potties, no permits, big sanitation violations. State investigators rolled in, and even an IRS agent showed up curious about the unreported event income. Postal inspector too, since Karen had my mail forwarded to the HOA office intercepting legal notices, so I'd stay in the dark. Every agency found violations. Every single one wanted to talk to Karen. Meanwhile, I filed lawsuits, trespass, property damage, fraud, theft of services, emotional distress, the works. My lawyer was giddy, said he'd never seen such an open and shut case of HOA abuse, and those forged county documents kicked it up to outright criminal fraud. The following Monday, I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the work crews I'd hired on an emergency injunction. They tore down every last thing Karen had installed, gazebo, playground benches, the whole lot, carted away in trucks, concrete jackhammered porta potties hauled off, leaving dead grass as the only trace. Karen showed up screaming about destruction of HOA property. But the sheriff's deputy handed her a thick stack of papers, a restraining order keeping her 500 feet from my property, a cease and desist for all HOA activities, court summons for criminal fraud, a county bill for $73,000 in fines. She just stood there, opening and closing her mouth like a beached fish. That's when the rest of the HOA board showed up, called an emergency meeting right there on the street. They voted her out as president before she could say a word, terrified of getting dragged down with her. When the motion was read to kick her off the board completely, Her precious clipboard slipped from her hands and her papers scattered down the street. The district attorney himself rolled up to say she was being charged with 4 counts of felony fraud, 2 counts of forgery, 3 counts of embezzlement, and criminal trespass. Each charge meant serious prison time. Embezzlement alone was over $60,000, a Class B felony. Her face just drained of color when she saw the handcuffs. She kept saying it was all a misunderstanding, that she just wanted to improve the neighborhood. But nobody was buying it, not with the whole block watching, half of them filming for social media. They led her away reading her rights, and everyone just stared, some shaking their heads, others flat out laughing at how far she'd taken things. She was facing nearly 20 years in prison and a mountain of fines, and that's not counting what the IRS or the state would throw at her next. So yeah, if you're wondering if justice ever gets served when an HOA president goes full dictator on your family land, sometimes it does, and it's every bit as satisfying as you'd hope. But let me ask you, if your HOA tried to steal your yard, would you stand your ground or just roll over and take it? Drop your story or your 2 cents below. Let's hear where you draw the line. And if you've ever tangled with a Karen, you know what I mean, like comment and share your take on what real justice looks like in a neighborhood gone wild.